Ah, that one. Okay. Right. The stream now has sound, and it will be slightly more interesting. Thank you for picking that up. Okay, I should have checked all of those things. Right. So what I remember from that, and what was important is not, oh, for this function it should be a string and a separate function for the null option. It's that idea of, for me, the idea of moving away from doubling up on things. So in the code, you were reusing the function, right? You were reusing the function, saying, oh, I could just change this parameter, and I can do mostly the same thing, but this parameter will change some of what happens internally, right? And it's a, yeah, but that parameter is a string, right? The fact that you could set it to null and then have the function do something different, yes, that's possible, but it's not a good way of doing it because it doesn't match my mental model of what I'm trying to achieve. And we're just looking at a switch statement, which had, you were saying up to like 15 different types? Between 15 and 20. So we've got 15 to 20 different sort of modes or different graphics that we want to show. And initially it was set up as an input as string, right? Because I can write in the string of the name of things, right? Now that's okay, it works. But as a programmer, one of the things I want to be able to do is I want to see what my options are, right? I know all of you guys like it when you open up your right bracket and it tells you the parameters that go into a function, yeah? And if you click on one of those and it gives you a drop down of the options that this parameter can take, that's awesome, right? Because then you can see, oh, I've got these three options, I'll pick one of them. If it just says string, and those strings are going to select something from a list, so there's only 15 valid strings that exist, I then have to work out what strings those are. I have to work out, you know, is it like error flag, and is it error space flag? Is it error with a capital E? Is it error with a lowercase e? Is it error dot flag? Like, if it's a string, I have no idea kind of the potential possibility space, which one I'm supposed to pick. So rather than using a string, you create an enum, which then creates a drop-down list in your IDE, which then allows you to click on it and go, oh, those are my options, and I can pick one, right? Now, the idea of reflection is you look at that and go, okay, so we had that code, we reviewed that code, we changed that code. When I move to that conceptualization phase, what am I drawing out of that? I'm drawing out of it not, oh, this instance is enums better than strings. And it's not always the case, and you shouldn't draw the general perception that, oh, enums are always better than strings, because, you know, that's not true either. It's how does my data type help other programmers get their code correct and get their code written quickly and debugged fast, right? So this idea of trying to work out what is the value of what you're doing. So, and I've said some of these, so I put down some hints from me as to what I do when I'm trying to be reflective on my process. So one of the ones we've already discussed is explaining things to your cat or your soft toy or a rubber ducky. This is sometimes called the Sanity, the Sanity Sieve, where you just the process of explaining something makes you turn this coding mesh in your brain into a linear structure which you say out your mouth, and that forces you to kind of think of it in a different way, puts it into a different structure. And it's not the feedback you get from the soft toy that matters, it's the mental process you had to go through to get it to be linear. Yeah, that, and I know it doesn't feel that way yet, but one of the things I was saying to my master's students is the reason we get you to write reports is not just to document the stuff you've done. It should also be part of your thinking process. Like when we talk about commenting. If commenting is part of your code development process, where you write little comments to yourself about what things are going to be, and you leave them in the code, commenting becomes part of the process. Writing is part of the thinking process. It doesn't happen after you've had your idea. It happens as part of having your idea. Right? So it's about trying to integrate those together. And explaining to your cat is not because the cat needs to know it. Right? Well, unless you've got a very strange cat. I never had that strange cat. Did have a strange cat. But so questions during action and questions after action. So I said, so when we do code reviews, how is this thing actually used? Not what am I trying to achieve here, but when I get out of this function, how is it actually going to be used in the rest of the program? Right? So do I need the accuracy I'm looking at? How long will it take? All those sort of things. How common is the situation? Do I need to do this now, or is there something else I should be doing? Right? So often as a developer you get stuck into solving the current problem you're in, and if you just step back and go, well, actually no, this is a detail, I'll just push this, I'll put a stub in here, I'll put a temporary variable in, and I'll move to something more critical. And if you've got errors, can you consistently repeat the error? Right? Because once you can nail it down and know exactly what is causing the error, then you can start fixing it. While you have no idea what's the problem, you can't fix it. And one of the questions I ask myself when I'm thinking about teaching, and you need to sometimes ask yourself, is what is the benefit to the client of me implementing / improving this bit of software? Right? What I do is when I'm looking at my practices as a lecturer, I try and think, okay, how is what I'm doing now helping the students learn? Right? Is this helping the students learn, or is it irrelevant? Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of admin in NTNU which doesn't seem to help the students learn. It seems to be there to what we call feed the beast. Have you heard that phrase before? So basically, any time when you seem to be just, in administration terms, you are doing things just to keep the administration happy. Right? You're not actually getting things done that's productive. You are just feeding the beast. Right? The beast of administration and overhead. And you just have to feed it to keep it satisfied so it stays off your back. Right? And so often that's called feeding the beast. Because if it doesn't get fed, it gets angry. And so you do a bunch of reporting, you log your hours, and you do it, and a bunch of these things aren't actually helping the project move forward. They're just overhead. And so that can be a challenge, right? To balance am I doing things that actually move things forward? And then afterwards, what went wrong? Could I do things differently to avoid the problem? Are there things I can change about my environment to change the likelihood of this happening, of bad things happening? Can I set up triggers myself, warnings that allow me to think about why things went wrong, and to get myself out of being stuck in my code? Right? Because when your head goes deep into code, you often start missing things, and so having some triggers to make you think differently. Right? Now, sometimes in companies, Friday afternoons, this time, is used as that trigger to step back and have other people look at your code and step back from the actual problem and say, okay, let's think about this. Where are we at? What are we trying to achieve? Right? So when you leave university, can you think of those triggers for yourself so that we don't put them in there, but you choose to have those triggers to make you reflect on things? You can also do this in relationships, right? Some people will have 5-year plans. They'll do I'll evaluate this relationship in 6 months' time. Right? I'll see where we're at. You could do at the moment we're not thinking about children, but if I want children, I'm going to have to think about it at some point. So, okay, in a year's time, we'll talk about children. We won't talk about it till then, but we've got this trigger, this date in the future. That's when we'll have this discussion. Yeah? And you know, if you're really worried, you set up a reminder on your phone that sets an alarm on that date in a year's time, right? Because you can just go reminder. So, you know, there are things practically you can do to trigger yourself to remember to do things. Right? That's why we use Trello boards. That's why we have reminders. That's why we set dates. That's why we do a Gantt chart with a timeline to try and give ourselves triggers. Right? That's why we have the 2-week sprints. That's why we do daily stand-ups. That's why we do check-ins. It's always trying to give these triggers to do this reflection task. So, with all of that said, for my 20 minutes, who would like to do a code review? You guys have some code, right? And you've got some code. Okay. They went first, so you come second. Okay, right. So we'll go over to you guys. Have you got any questions about that? Do you guys spend much time reflecting on why you're at university?
When you start studying, yes. Why
am I here? Well, luckily you guys are nearly at the point where, like, oh, I just have to get to the, like, 8 weeks, and then I'm free. So light at the end of tunnel kind of period. But do you guys reflect on what you're learning and why you're learning it? And
yeah, for example, in my case, at the beginning when I was starting the visual, I was like, okay, I mean, this is at the beginning was normal engineering, like physics, maths, programming, and all that. So it was kind of a global area, and I was like, okay, I'll get to like this more when it comes by. I go forward. So years went by, and well, I guess that changed to, okay, I'll finish this up so I can get a job. It's something I like, or I have to find something I like.
Right, yes, so it was the, this seems pretty silly, but I've already put, well, so that's actually, so there's an issue of the fallacy of sunk cost, which you have to be careful of there, right? So, you know the fallacy of sunk cost? Okay, so the sunk cost fallacy happens in software engineering all the time. Is the, I've already put in like 2 years of effort into getting this 3-year degree, right? So, but I've now worked out that I hate being a veterinarian, or I hate being a doctor, or I hate programming. But what I'll do is I'll spend another year getting the qualification so that I feel I've completed, even though I know I'm never going to go down that route because I hate it so much now.
It's not hate.
Right, but so there's this idea of like at some point you've sunk so much effort into something, you've got to keep putting more effort into it, right? Even if it's no longer what you want, right? And because you know the sunk cost fallacy is, well, actually your time might be better spent doing something else, right? So one of the things I've had a couple of students do this with teaching degrees, right? So they've come and done computer science. 2 years in, gone, nah, I don't want to be a computer scientist. So they go and do a teaching degree. Now, their couple of years of doing computer science actually works really well for them to become a computer science teacher at a high school or at a primary school, because, you know, they do know enough to teach at their low level, they just don't want to be a programmer. Right? So they didn't need to finish the degree. Now, there are provisos on that, right? So at this stage, you probably want to complete. So spending the next 2 months working to get your thesis done isn't sunk cost, it is just completion, and that's okay. But, you know, if you've failed half of your courses and you don't like doing this, then yes, you might be entering a sunk cost fallacy, right? And certainly when you're working on code, like I saw a discussion on Photoshop, and Adobe was saying, you know, Photoshop is getting really hard to develop now because it's so arcane and there's so much like legacy code in it. But if they started from scratch, they don't know if they would get up to speed in it in time, and they don't know if they'd make a product that was as good as Photoshop is if they started again from scratch, because they'd hit other problems and the technology would advance again, and so there's this hard decision of, do we keep working on the product that's there, or do we scrap it and try and start again from scratch? And they don't know. Right? There's no good metric for it. There isn't an obvious, oh, this is sunk cost, this is return on investment. It's unknown. Okay, so code review time. Any other questions? Any other thoughts on reflections? Nope. Okay, well, we'll reflect on this stuff. The stream can hear me wherever I stand. I'll stand over here so you can go out there. Okay, so let's have a look at this code. What have we got here?
Okay, so we're doing the AI for a game.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our AI's like movement script, where we make the AI move.
Mm-hmm.
So right at the start, we just invoke some functions that will repeat every 0.02 seconds. It's just those functions we use to find the closest player and all projectors in the scene. It looks kind of weird because we hard-coded it at the moment.
So you have several AIs, and so they're not invoking at the same time.
We're interleaving the functions, basically.
So they are all working at a different time, so it's not all in one frame, but they're all in several.
We're still not sure if that's a good thing, but we'll just keep it.
Okay, so in terms of what you're trying to achieve, right? I'm going to assume that this achieves what you're wanting it to achieve.
Yeah, that's
right. My problem is the way this is written. This bit,
it's hard-coded.
like three pluses in a row, with a space gap to say the difference between the incrementer and the addition of this thing to the incrementer.
Yeah.
Post increment, because
it's post.
Because this is post increment rather than pre increment.
Yes.
You are adding this after you've done the incrementation.
Yes.
Right?
You should probably have parenthesize.
Well, does this need to be in this call? Can it be done before it? Do you need to make this 2 lines of code, or could you have a bit of so this repeater is one more than that repeater, yeah? Because that is used and incremented, and this is then used and incremented, which means this one is one more than that one, yeah?
Yeah, that's a bug actually.
Yeah, that's a bug.
Okay, right. So so if these two were supposed to be the same repeater value, right? Then yes, what you've done is you've explicitly broken by copying and pasting. So yeah, no, that's even worse. Okay, right. So the reason that's worse is now you're doing different things. You just do it and like take this plus out. Do the repeater as its own line incrementing, right? Just do an incrementing. Again, well, if you want to keep the behavior the same, you need to put this before these 2 lines.
No, I suppose. We wanted to increment after.
You want to increment after you, well, yes. Right, yeah, because that incrementer was happening in here and added to it after the incrementer.
Yes.
Right, yeah, okay. So if this then does what you want, that's far better, yeah?
Can we just make the 2 parameters?
Okay, so this again, a general thing is you could solve it, right? So this again is a notation thing, right? You could solve the problem by using mathematical notation, or you can use it by using algorithmic notation and layout, right? So bracketing is merely a layout thing, right? Well, not merely a layout. Bracketing actually can change the order of algorithms, right? So one of the things is if you have A times B plus C, should you put brackets around A times B? Because we know by precedence, A times B will always happen before plus C, right? But some people say, well, no, put the brackets in. I know they don't change what it does, but it's clearer, right? And that's about like how you describe solutions. So yes, you could bracket things, but I don't know if that makes it clearer. I think this makes it clearer than it was, right? So we're using the repeater. Now, this repeater, this multiplier happens before this addition.
Yeah.
Why?
Because basically we don't want the closest player and projectile search to happen at the same time. Because they're both kind of heavy.
Right. Now, okay. So this is just an offset on the repeater.
Yes.
Is the repeater an integer? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a zero float, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a float.
It's a float.
Yeah. This is the repeater. This is when it starts.
That's an int. Yes. So this is an integer. Otherwise,
Yeah.
plus plus would be
Yeah.
confusing. So incrementing a floating point number would be a challenge. Okay, so this is an integer. If I did repeater plus 1 in brackets here, so this first number you're passing, right,
Yeah.
is when this thing should happen, yeah?
Yeah.
And so because it looks like if I took the 0.2 out of these, right? If I put the 0.2 float out of all of this would be 1 times repeater, comma 1, right? And this would be 1 times repeater plus a half, comma 1. Yeah? Right? If it was mathematical and I just take out a common factor of 0.2 float, right? Then
Yes.
all right. Then
We could probably store it in a float beforehand or something.
right. So well, no, it's just I'm thinking, you know, if these repeaters are they so you are incrementing them,
Yeah.
right? So they're stepping up, and then you're multiplying it by 0.2 here. This 0.2, how does it relate to that 0.2? Or 0.02? This is 0.02 and that's 0.2. Okay.
Yeah, that's how often it should repeat. So
Yeah.
it happens every like 0.2 seconds.
Right.
Is repeater a good name for that variable?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Because I see it as that's the first is that an offset of time, like how
Yeah.
long until it should happen the first time.
Yes.
Yes, so it's not the repeating time.
Yep.
No.
So it's the initiation time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's also I was wondering about them as well, because you have private void start and you call the comments as use this for initialization.
Oh yeah, that's
So-
Unity. It's basically start happens when a script is initialized.
Yes.
It's part of the Unity API.
So the function start is a defined name that you have to use.
Yeah,
in
but
this,
it start running multiple times.
Just one.
just once.
Yeah.
Or once for every basically object that uses this script.
Yeah.
And
And repeater
It's a
comes
start.
from the object class outside of start, and so start is called multiple times.
start is called multiple
Yeah.
times, but
And repeater is different each time it's called?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Right.
correct.
So repeater is a static outside of here
yes.
that does an offset based on how many other people have been
Yes.
called with this particular
Yeah.
start. And they're each offset by 0.2, which is the amount of this
Yeah.
offset. And everything repeats at every 5 times a second.
Yes, 5
Right.
times a second.
But you set them off, start off at a slightly different initialize rate.
Yes.
Right.
It's just so we have a more like stable CPU usage on the AI.
Yeah.
I understand the reason to do it. So yes, visually 0.02 and 0.2, there is no relationship between them, technically. This is just an offset fudge,
Yes.
right? To offset. It really should be,
A different name.
well, if you're going to do it algorithmically, what you do is you start with 0, the next one would be halfway, the next one would be a quarter, and then 3/4, and then you do 1/8, 3/8, 5/8, 7/8, and then you do 1/16, 3/16, 5/16,
Yeah, I see it.
Right? So if you so at the moment you are the first time you do it, you front load. You're guessing here that there are about 10 things.
I think there can be a maximum of 5, I think. So we probably should update that to 0.04.
No. You should update it to duration divided by number of items. Right? Because what you've done is you've already thought in your head it's 0.04 because there are a maximum of 5 items.
Yes.
Why don't you just tell me that in here?
Because then we will go looking for a list. Most likely.
Well, even if you wrote it in here, right, as, offset equals time divided by number of like 5, right? And you get going number of items. That would at least tell me what this number is and why it's there.
The thing is, right now
Yep.
we don't have that information in this script, like how many there are.
No, you don't. So you don't have to do it by an active lookup. You just have to tell me why this number is this number, right? If you want it, like if you're being like really, really clever in doing this thing, as I said, if you were being super clever, you'd create an offset measurement that would put the first one here, then halfway, and half of each of those, and then split up into the bits, and then split up even more, and like you'd slowly fill in your binary tree of when to start things, right? That would be the ultimate algorithm for doing this for n 100 many things, but you don't have that here. But if you say, even instead of 0.2f, if you said repeat time equals 0.2, offset time equals repeat time divided by num items, and just set num items equal 5 in here, then yes, I would be happy, right? I would say, oh, okay, so you've got the repeat time here, you've got your offset. Okay, I understand what's going on here. Okay, so yes, refactor that bit, right? Just for a start, because that was confusing. Okay, so
Then we just initialize path there for something.
you initialize path there for some reason.
Yeah, it needs to be initialized. It needs to be initialized, so we put it there in the start. Like, personally, I think initialization should be on top. So.
Well, so navmesh is used here. No, that's a class.
Navmesh is the Unity.
But you're not using path yet. That just gets initialized somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Then we have a debug feature, which is a cylinder that we just basically shows us where the AI wants to go.
Yep.
So we just find that one. And then we initialize, like we get the ID for several Navmesh areas that we need for basically to change the cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole start function.
Right. So again, this get area from name, area 1. And get strings. Are strings the right answer there?
We really struggle with this one because this is Unity area.
Yeah, this is the name that we choose for it, so it is actually.
It's a string in Unity.
Yes.
So you do.
Have to look for string.
Right.
And the area 1 is something we have put everything. So.
Okay. Yep.
See.
Then string is the right thing probably here. Yep. Okay.
Then there's the actual script.
The first if basically says if
If the path doesn't have any path in it.
if we reach this goal basically.
Yeah, it calls the calculation path. Yeah. Here's where we actually calculate the target. And then it has one corner, just go to that corner, and then it has several control flows to the closest that is a certain distance away. So we avoid the chafing from too close corners.
So this corners path with one. So C in path corners. C distance equals C minus transformation position, which would be that. If C, right, so the difference between this one and this one is that this one ignores this condition.
Yeah, and this one has the length of 1.
Yeah, so so
You can only go to one position anyway. You only have a length of 1.
yes, but if this could also be a vector with a length 1, right?
Yeah.
So C would be the only thing in here, and C would still come into here, even if it's length 1, right? And C would still do this calculation, which is this calculation,
Yeah.
right? Then the only difference is if it's length 1, you always return that, and otherwise, if it's more than 1, you return when you find one that's less than this particular threshold.
Yeah. We had some problem with that if when it's supposed to go past the wall, it kept going into it. This actually makes it go around. If it's only one structure, it doesn't matter because it hasn't a wall that is supposed to crash into. So if it's just a straight line, you can just walk a straight line. If they're actually around corners, they have to move around. It's better if it moves like that than they're just going to the wall.
So what is this? So I'm just thinking, if I have a thing with length 2, am I always guaranteed to return? No. This should never be called.
Yeah.
Because so you have to guarantee that this if statement will always fire at some point.
Yeah, and the path should never be, should always return something in these two functions.
Really? So this condition. So either so you're guaranteeing that this condition is always there's always a true version of that condition.
For the most part, yeah, I think so.
That seems extremely dangerous,
Yeah.
right? To have so here because we've got this issue of a potentially undefined return because I have a return inside something which is an if which may or may not succeed.
Basically, this is Unity's like pathing algorithm. So if there's more than one corner left in the path, then the distance will be guaranteed to be higher than the if check there, basically, because the pathing will take you somewhere farther than right next to you, since there's more than 2 corners, or 1 corner.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Whew. Okay. I see.
We should probably comment that part.
Well, the other thing is, well, so 2 things. One is, if this is a special case where you don't actually need it to be a special case where it can just fall out of here anyway.
Can probably go into there, but
Right? Because the answer is, if you don't need this special path, it adds additional logic that abound around corners, which I may not need, right? And so the logic of, if there is a corner and there's only one, it will still come in here, it will still do this calculation. And if that calculation is always going to be okay, then it should always return.
and there was something wrong with it kept giving some kind of y value, the height value, which kind of and I didn't have a board and fucked up, so.
Okay, so in principles, this bit here, where you're doing so I'm assuming that the reason you do this is because then you do want to not return and go and have a look at the other corners.
Yeah. Basically, find the first corner that's farther, so far away until not at the exact one.
Unity creates a lot of corners, a lot of points
Yeah.
for the AI to follow around corners.
Yep.
which messed with our like movement system, because it tried to like
Right, so you want to find, but no, you're not finding the furthest one, you're finding the first one that satisfies the
Yes,
condition.
Because that's the one we want to go to.
Right, you want to find the nearest point that is not the one that's right next to you.
Yeah. Or can you stack more on top of it than right next to it.
Right.
Just kind of something I had to do to get around Unity's path. Pathing. Because Unity's pathing was too detailed.
Right.
So because we have to use like the player's movement system to move our character.
Right.
We can only give a direction basically.
Right.
And that's since the direction was so close, like the point, the direction kind of spazzed around the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this probably works the wrong way of doing it. Right? So just because it works doesn't mean it's a good way of doing it, right? This, at best, I would think you'd call this out and call it find next point. Okay? So I'd actually have a name for what this for each is doing. And then within that, it would actually basically set this up, right? So you go through from 1, 2 to things and say, well, okay, if I can't find any other point, this is the point I'll return. And then go and find a better point, if there is one. That way you've always got something to return. Right? So this is extremely dangerous programming technique, right? To put a return inside a function which you hope will succeed and should in theory succeed all the time. Unless Unity changes some of the way it does its cornering algorithm, and then this suddenly fails and drops out to this, oh, I don't have a position to give you anymore function.
It still returns a position. That's probably not the correct one.
Why didn't it just return this one?
Because if it's 0, then probably crash or.
Well, no, but it's 0. You've already got the 0. The 0 is already calculated there, right?
Yeah.
But does this create a path? Does this actually take some path and creates a path that is long path? So it generates a new path.
Yeah.
If it's 0 length path, it generates a new path. Yeah. Like you probably want that to be checked again here, because you've just hoped that it's generated a new path.
Could probably be a check.
Right? This technically could be a while loop. While path is length 0, find a path, and then at least you know when you exit this, it's going to be of some length. Right? So like you're moving forward without having guarantees about what's happening. Right? And here, again, moving forward without guarantees. Here, returning without a guarantee of anything. Right? So just changing the order in which you do things. Right? Let's work out what should I return. I'll return this one, unless I can find a better one. And by better one, I mean one that's further along, which won't make me crash into something. Right? Now, how we actually, what we normally do is we look at the points in the path along the future and see if we have line of sight from the outside of my body to the outside of the body of that point, right? So you check, am I going to run into anything if I move to that point? No. Okay, so check the next one. Yes. Okay, I'll move to this one and then sit. Right, so the look ahead pathing is what you do, but this is the wrong way round, right? You should have a value you're going to return, check to see if you find a better value and return the better value, otherwise fall back to returning that first value you calculated. Okay, so refactor this from that perspective of I always want to have a return value and then I'll try and get a better return value. Okay, right, we'll take a pause there, seeing it's now 3 o'clock. So, 3:09, right, so we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll do Jesus and UI's code. Okay. Whoa! but like, the neat thing is, the code works.
Yeah, or at least most of the time.
Most of the time. No guarantees it's going to work. Yeah, no, that's why they need to give their code. I left in this picture. It's a deeper thinking process, right? Rather than, because I still think most of the students are still in the getting it working phase.
Yep.
I code until the code does what I expect it to do.
Yeah.
And that was a perfect example, you know, even the naming. What? That's not the name for that. What? Start for an object is called multiple times? That's odd. Oh, right, you've got the static outside. That really needs to be highlighted.
The magic 0.0.
At 0.02 and 0.2 and like,
So similar.
yes! So my first thought is the common factor, and my brain just went, oh, they're the same. No, there's 1.0, one's
No, he's not a tenth the size.
why is it a tenth size? Well, because we have 5 objects. What? Yes. Right, I'm going to grab a coffee. Grab a coffee.
Må gjøre opp hva jeg tenker.
No. We have to no, this is Simon's class.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, pretty sorry.
JavaScript, but never done JavaScript. Yeah, I know it's easy, but you have to start somewhere, right?
Then you'll join the function. Guys, when you're Christmas dinner.
So you're gonna win and lose like content on the map?
The weirdest thing was when they did Pokemon. You have
Basically,
one
corner
half.
är ett hjörne på särskilt. Right?
Was singing in English. Another half was singing Norwegian audience. And then we had people singing in Spanish and German and French. Like, holy shit.
Vi kan snakke om det liksom self-aware på
No, I mean,
like I think we can do all the things you know, testing, but testing is always it's always development testing will take up 80% of the development time, 20% will be just
I think we can meet, yeah.
well, I also have to do it in my way, so it's way harder than the first.
Ja, okej.
yeah, like Tuesday.
Är det inte där
Jo,
You want to stay for a tour? It's gonna be funny. You'll see the politicians with no handle exceptions. There is a bit to handle exceptions.
Well, you should have concept because it doesn't have checked exceptions, so if you just ignore exceptions, you don't want to have them.
No, but if one exception.
Can't say this method will draw an exception.
No, it's a try catch with catches.
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, for example, here, try and make.
Jesus, have you connected yourself up? Have you connected yourself up? Who said Jesus?
Nope, I don't have an HDMI. Oh, I can ask those guys. Right, let's see. Okay, first of all, exceptions are not handled yet.
That's fine.
There's a big to do there. Because there are lots.
To some extent, like. So that's a question. Unhandled exceptions are less concerning than badly handled exceptions. So if they're completely unhandled, then I know that I still have to do that task. If they're badly handled, I might miss that task still needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, right now one of those exceptions basically throws you out of the application if it's bad implemented.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah,
Okay.
it's quite important.
So I'll stand over here.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. The main issue here is this is the.
Can you make your code larger so other people can see it?
I guess. No.
I'm looking around to see if any of these are a percentage.
Does anyone know how to make the code larger in Android Studio?
In Android Studio,
was that the one where you could go into the settings and? Yeah, I think there's some settings like if you go to like the normal settings thing.
settings,
Yeah, I think under editor.
Should be something
editor,
size
Appearance and editor.
size here.
size, yeah. See if you can make that 24.
Not clickable.
Oh, you could override
Right.
and then make
I
it
think
24.
That's for the editor, not the code.
Oh, it could be there for the editor, not the code. That could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So undo that. You did the exact opposite of what needed to happen. So, yep.
There's an option somewhere to
Set it back to 12.
Control.
And then unclick the override, and then go apply. Yeah.
Editor, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's an editor.
Font size, presentation mode, font size.
36.
Yeah, try that. No effect.
There is an option somewhere where you can choose to hold the control button to
Well,
suit
and
we
your
can
scroll
always do the
whereas-
Google thing. Oh, where?
Like in the settings.
Here? Oh, but this is for look for.
Go back to the settings.
Back settings.
Should have think about this before. In editor maybe?
Yeah.
You know.
Color and fonts.
Size.
Try 30.
24.
24, yeah, 24 looks good. Okay.
Right.
Woohoo! Okay.
Okay.
Yay! Now we can
have a
describe code on.
scope.
Okay.
But okay. So this is basically our login activity, login or sign up.
Mm-hmm.
The thing here is that I made a how's it called? Intent service, which is here. It's the checker. When you introduce your email and it has passed all the checks, like is it empty, is it correct, is it an email, and all that, you pay it is here. Like if email sign up is empty, if this is an email address, if the password is empty, if not, you just set the password, and this basically set the errors. So then, if validation is true, which then you basically send on an intent to checker, which is the function that checks with the server, like make the corresponding queries to the server to check if it's okay. So I have some errors. I just put some random numbers for it to be. So now we're concerned on this side. Okay. So big. Okay, so what it does is basically it instantiates the first authentication key for the email. Then it basically runs all these tests because it receives, okay, 1 second, email check, intent gets string, it gets the email, gets the password, and now it goes here. Like if the main activity is login, so you come from the login, you basically look for login query, you go to login query, sign up query, login query. Okay, so basically you make the JSON item, you send it to the server gives you back the authentication key from the API. And you get the authentication key. And then you log in. The main problem with this is that we don't know why, for some reason, when you come back, when this ends, like for example, the check done is in this login, which is right here.
Yeah.
The receiver, what's it called? You put a bundle, you put the authentication key and the result code in the bundle. Like check log, you put the bundle's result data, so you put it here, and the check done login, which is it's okay, it's done.
A code.
It's
yeah.
good. So you go here, and you have a switch case, which you mentioned before that we could use a map, but I don't know.
That's for me. That's for you.
Yeah, but the map, like maybe it could be used.
There's some things so that was more when you're trying to extract the value from something, but yeah.
All right, so here you check on login, and you log in, you go to the next activity, you start the intent, good, everything's done. The problem is that it goes through every state of the switch.
Break.
You don't have
Break. The basic.
Oh, the break. Great, problem solved.
Wow, Jesus. Only 5.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Default fall through. Yeah.
I was like, what is going on? What is going? I forgot. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah.
Yep. Sanity check. Yep. No, that's all good. That's fine. That happens.
Yeah, but not in front of so many.
Oh no! I've had it happen in front of just as many people, and it's the yeah. No.
Okay.
Actually, that is a very explicit point around, you know, when you're in it, it is often hard to see it, right? It's only when you come out to a large group and someone goes, what? And you go, oh, God, yes, right? So no, trust me, this happens all the time. It's completely normal on a Friday afternoon. That's why you do it on a Friday afternoon, so you can go and have drinks and forget about it. And then Monday morning, no one's embarrassed because of what they did at drinks on Friday is more embarrassing than what you did here in the code review.
Okay. So after this is solved, we can do an actual code review. For example, every time I make
Wow, those are some deep if then else's you've got there.
a what?
Those are some deep if then else cases.
Oh yeah.
So,
I mean, it's basically.
Yeah, this is getting pretty far in, and these are pretty large functions. I know. I know the text is bigger. It's large functions.
I mean, the first it tries to log in. It tries to retrieve the authentication key. If the authentication key is null, it's nothing because I made the server to give nothing if you're not logged in. You put the bundle and you basically send the receiver, okay, it's not correct login, so don't start the other activity. Now it will probably work. If not, well, if it failed. And now if it's a sign up, which is the server main activity.
Okay. So one question is, you know, if type main activity login, right? Does that need to be here, or could that be put into its own function?
What do you mean? Like?
Well, if we've got like a type here, which is type login, right? Then it does all the stuff. What happens at the end of this if? Where's the end of this if? There, it's this else.
It's an else that is a sign up.
This big else here, right? So you've got two things. You can either be doing a login or a sign up.
Yeah.
Why not make those a login function and a sign up function?
They are implemented. Well, the queries are implemented over here.
Like no, but you know, but with this big if statement you've got here, right? So go back up to this big split if, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
you've got this is this block from here down to a bit further
here,
right? So that is all the log information, right? And then you've got a completely different function, basically a whole another block of code under a different else under the else, right? Which is all sign up. Right, so go down to where the end of this else happens. The end of the else is there, and then immediately ends the function.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got an if clause and an else clause. If you just called those different functions, right, you could then do an if login, call the login function, else call the sign up function. And then you'd actually have a sign up function which wasn't connected to the login function at all. It was its own separate function that was just a sign up function. And it wouldn't be embedded with this login or sign up function combination thing, right? Now, conceptually, the reason why we put login and sign up together is because on the UI end, the person is either logging in or signing up, right? Because if you haven't logged in before, then we'll sign you up. But there's no reason to try and put those in the code together, right? So I would, first of all, I'd just make two extra functions, one called a sign up function, one called login function, and then have that if statement check in its own small decide what to do function, and then a sign up function's just clean, the login function's clean. Okay? So you guys, yeah, you see why? Yeah. Okay. Anything else people see there that they do differently?
Maybe the query, because I was talking to Marius the other day, and maybe, I mean, we can do this afterwards. But for example, query, I'm using the library right now. It's called OKHTTP, which basically means the HTTPs queries. So what Marius suggested me is basically create a whole function. Right now, all of them are plain strings. And then add it, for example, I can show you more queries. For example, queries in event activity, you have the queries. in this arena. For example, basically, where is it? Yeah, search for it. Yeah. No. Okay, in this function we don't have that. Either way, let's in the post, what Mario suggested basically was to basically put fragments of the function in a whole separate file. So we can just call, for example, body, and just call body all the time. Like, create just a file with chunks of query, for example, where filter, all that. Would that be optimal?
So you're thinking, so here, you're posting, and you're thinking of just taking this out and having it set by a different value, or?
No, basically, I mean, create a global variable like string. I mean, body customers, and to be final, to be have this body login customers to a file, but basically have the queries centralized in one file, not the query body. For example, if I want to create a filter, it would be, how was it? It was customers slash get ID. It was one function where filter where something like it was where. Yeah. And all of this, like there are lots of things you can apply. But for example, create a variable called where filter, and just basically what he suggested us was to put a plus here.
Yep.
And put plus where filter and value and all that, instead of just writing it straight away, even though it works either way.
So what we generally do when doing this kind of thing is, and you'll see this in most URL things, is this will be like string host, right? So it will be host plus API customers, which will be a string, right? So it will be the host name, which will be stored as a global somewhere, and then customers, so it would be host plus folder plus filter.
I think Android Studio has its own resources system with values. Like, you can also with that, so you can just put it in there and call it a get resources.
Yeah.
You can also store it in the preferences and call it whenever you need it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could just as in the same way that Android Studio has language resources for internationalization, you can also have a resources file for strings, a strings resources, and just look this up as strings.host or it's something like that. It's something, yeah.
I actually have just one comment. As you said, Jesus, all the queries are made when you need it, exactly, like in the event page or the inactivity page, or you just don't make a client side which take care of all the queries in the backside, and you just ask, I need that query in that time, without making a query, without making the query in the same activity.
So you mean join, like
a client side who takes care of all calls to the server.
Like a class which basically has all the function of the queries.
Basically, yeah.
I don't know
if that's
So if you go up, so this query, this login, so this is a login query, yeah? Login.post.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're just trying to do a sign up to this thing, but you said you could get different data back, and you might be doing different things with this
like
post.
Each function, each query is really different from any other, because I want this data or I want.
Right.
So each activity has like 2 or 3 query functions. They are different from any other.
So there's a couple of questions, right? So yes, you're right. So the question of do you do it server side or client side, right? If you can trust the client to only ever ask for reasonable things, then yes, you can make it all client side. If you don't always trust the client, then sometimes it's better to put it on server side and you say, right, I have this set of queries. You can have one, but only ones I'm willing to give you. Okay? And then you code up all your queries yourself and just say, select the query you want. Oh yeah, there you go. There's the result of that query. Okay? So this is a typical injection, SQL injection problem of the, if you run any query that a client suggests to you to run, because it's got all the knowledge about how queries run, then yes, you open yourself up to some really nasty security holes. So there's some quite good reasons to implement everything on server side and not actually have, and never take a string from any client as a valid piece of code. Always treat it as a selector of code. Right? So everything is a stored procedure, and all you're ever doing is selecting a stored procedure. It is time consuming and boring, and it's not great for testing because you can't just whack some stuff in at the client side and get the server to do it for you. You have to actually go to the server, tell the server, oh, this is something you can do, and here's the query. And then the client side, you ask, oh, I want that known query. I want query 15, right? And then you type in query 15 on the server side and actually tell it what it is. We've had some interesting challenge with debugging. So we've got a Horizon 2020 project, which does notifications on iPhone and Android. And the guys are having problems because some of the notifications aren't going through. And they've done privacy by design. You guys know the phrase privacy by design? You can try and work it out. Okay, so this is all going to be a big deal for you guys in the future. Privacy by design is, from your first creation of the product, you should be thinking about the client's, the user's privacy, right? So you design from day one for it to be private, so that you don't try and bolt privacy on the end, right? So, so for example, the tracking app that my wife uses to know where I am, we wrote our own tracking app, and then Google came along with Google Latitude sharing, and so I share my Google Latitude sharing with her. But the privacy by design approach we did is I have a Connect Me app on my phone, and she can send an SMS to my phone. My phone then turns on GPS, checks my location, and sends her back an SMS to say where I am. Okay? But it's all done through SMSs. It's not done through a third party. Google sharing is through Google, right? So I'm sharing my location with Google, and then Google shares it with my wife. Right? So that's not private, that's using a trusted third party if you trust Google. Right? Whereas the text messaging, and we actually set up so I can encrypt my location and then decrypt it, so I can encrypt the request, and then I decrypt it with my app. I then find my location, I encrypt my location and send back, so anybody looking at my network traffic will just see 2 encrypted messages go back and forth and have no idea, right? So that's a privacy by design approach where I said, right, first of all, we're going to keep private, and then we're going to share location. The challenge he's got is that it's almost impossible for him to debug because everything's just tokens. So he can't trace anything because it's all private. Because it's been designed that you can't figure out who someone is. When you're trying to debug stuff, you can't find out who anyone is, so I can't debug it because I can't find when you say it's failing on Marius's phone. I go, well, I don't know which one is Marius because they're all hashes. I can't reverse engineer any of my protocols to work out that it was your phone that failed because I don't know, because it's been designed that way. Right? So this is so again, it makes it harder, but that's what the EU wants. They want privacy by design. And so the safety aspect here of putting all of those codes onto the server side slows it down, makes it harder to debug and to edit and to quickly iterate, but makes it much safer. Right? So there is a trade-off. You guys have, like, conceptually have to choose. Do you go down privacy by design, security by design, or are you prototyping and then throw away your prototype once you know what you need to do, and then redesign privacy by design once you know the functionality? Right? So it's, yeah. So So yes, it would be unsafe to do it on the client side, but maybe during testing you do that until you get to the point where you know what everything needs to be done, then you throw away that code and start again from scratch.
So would you suggest, for example, this function of login, it would just be like it would just be a function in the server, and you.
So in terms of asking to log in, so logins are still going to be run by the client, right? They're still going to ask for a login, right?
Yeah. And
so
it gives you the authentication key. And
yep.
You use it in the following queries.
Yeah, and then you send. But I probably still wouldn't trust the person, the client side, to be able to write their own where queries, right? I would want them to request a query that you have written manually yourself on the server side, right? So you don't offer all types of queries, you offer only a agreed set of queries, right? Now, you can create your own domain-specific language, your own set of acceptable parameters, right? So you don't get them to type in the thing, you say, okay, I've got a where, I know that I've got 10 strings that can go in with a where query. So when you ask me, you select one of those 10 by saying, right, when you send in the where clause, I check your string against one of the 10 that I accept, and whichever one is closest, I'll use that one. And then, you know, I accept a from query, and I just check, okay, I take your number, check it against the numbers I recognize, and then use the closest one. Right? So you don't have to write every single query. You still can use like where blah equals blah, but I don't give that text to you to write. I still have those. I just allow you to combine things that I accept. Right? So it's all combining in acceptable ways rather than free text on the client end. Right? So that's, if you're worried about SQL injection, then that's what you have to do. Right? And anytime you're moving into a real world environment, there'll be somebody doing SQL injection on you, right? And you can of course do some cleaning up your strings and all those sort of things. But even then, like with the Q-rate system, when we were rating question quality, I did all the SQL cleanups and you know checking that there weren't people putting JavaScript in there, and you know then people were putting in wrong numbers. So I had to check, like, are you the right number? And then people were screwing around by putting in floating point numbers to see, like, stop screwing with my system. And so I just went, okay, when I get a number in, I check, is it 1, 2, or 3? If it's 1, 2, or 3, then I think 1, 2, or 3. Otherwise, I just ignore it. Right? Just to get away from people screwing with my system. Right? Because they'll do packet inspection and they'll create their own artificial packets, and once you've given them a valid token, unless you're hashing using that token in some interesting way, they'll have logged in, they'll get the token, they'll then use that token with their created string to try and screw with your system. Right? So even token login doesn't guarantee that they're not going to screw with you. It just means that it is that person who logged in rather than a third party who's screwing with you. You know who to blame. Okay, yep. But you would probably move this into a string thing, right? And would be like Martin was suggesting. This would be a host string. This would be a customer string, and you just do host plus type plus filter or something like that.
Okay.
That's the wrong slashes. Hey. Okay.
We don't know how to break. We don't know how to come.
That's right.
It's fine. Yeah. Okay. So then, if we want to implement what Ahmed said, we basically have to refactor every class in wherever there's a query.
It's probably not worth doing that at this stage.
I mean, worth commenting on the report. Like we chose this because never worked with queries, or so I was like doing patchy work somehow. But if I have time, I can refactor it in a better way.
Yeah. Also, and I suppose this is a again a professional practice thing. Now, you had a bug with it going through all of the other loops, right? Because you hadn't put the break in, right? Going through all the other case statements. Some of your other bits of your code were responding to the fact that that was broken, potentially, right?
No.
So okay, let's assume, we'll do this hypothetically down there, okay? So, and this does happen, where you get an error, right? But it's an error that's doesn't make your program fail, it just does some odd things, right? And so you make a workaround somewhere else in your code to fix that, right? So you do an additional check later. The standard one of these is race conditions, where what you do is, oh, I've got a race condition. I know, I'll just add in a delay loop here, and I'll just wait for a second. And I hope that means that things will be fixed, and then I'll keep going, right? And then you actually find, oh, I found how to fix the race condition. I then got a callback. But then you forget to go in and remove that 1 second delay because, you know, that was done as a workaround somewhere else in the code. And when I fixed this bit, I didn't recognize all the places where I'd done those little workarounds that someone else, like, you know, Martin and I are working on code. I screwed something up with the login. That means it's got a race condition. Martin worked out, oh, well, screw it. I'll just add a second here. And that means Simon can deal with it later when he actually gets around to it. And I'll continue working. I then get around to it, fix it. He doesn't remember that, oh, I now have to go back and clean out that bit of code that was a workaround for this non-working code that's now working. And so our program then delays for a second.
I actually did that with all.
so yeah, I didn't know that, but you know, it happens. So, and again, remembering to go back and clean up that code later is actually quite hard because it was a workaround for something that was wrong in the past and you don't know when that got fixed, and because our Chetnall didn't know when to fix it, he didn't know when he'd fixed it that he should go and change all the dependent code, right? It happens a lot, right? And so one thing you do when you do a refactor is you do go back and you ask, like, do we need this anymore and why was it here, right? So if there was a second delay or something, like, why do we have this here? And that said, oh yeah, because of that problem. Oh yeah, that's gone now, so we can remove it, right? So this is what Jason was saying the other day, was you know, when they do anything hacky like that, they put a note next to it saying, we did this as a hack because of this version of the program or this bug. It's a workaround for this thing. So so basically with the idea that when you come back and see that, you'll check that condition is still something you have to work around, or they've fixed it, so you can remove this dirty hack, right? So when you're doing that kind of hack, if you put in this is a hack around an error in login, hopefully when you come back to review that code, you'll be able to go, oh yeah, that's right, that hack, I can get rid of it now. Yep.
Actually, the way we do it in my group is that we put a log statement with an error.
Right.
Each time you add a hack or something that should be changed, and when you run the program, and you see the red line goes through, so you know, okay, we have something we're going to remove. So we go back to that line.
So your technique is to add a log to log a debug issue, or so when you run it goes blah 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 blah. Yep, hack. Yep. So yeah, that's one way of doing it. Is putting in comments is another way. It depends on how urgent you need to fix that something is. But yep. Okay, so it's 10:02. We can probably go for. Do you have other things you want us to look at?
Like the queries.
Oh,
just a little note that when logging in, do you need email, name, and surname?
I think this was actually this is the signer. But the login is just the post object, which is the class that we used to. Like this is just the name. We can just refactor this.
That should be refactored because it's no longer. If it's now actually no longer login, it's now sign up. So sign in.
Yeah.
I know. But it's one.
Yeah. Sign up.
Yeah.
Yeah. That.
Did it make sense?
Good. Login is good.
Yeah. Cut and paste. What's going on? Yeah.
I did one side, but this one only uses the email and the password.
Yeah.
And then.
In both instances, you say that the function can throw an IO exception, but it doesn't.
Yeah, the exceptions are not yet. I have to go through everything because I wanted to make sure that the connection between the database and the app was complete in every part, and then go through, because most of the times they're the same as service, not the same, but they require similar behavior. So once I go through, like, I make sure that, okay, this receives it, this connected, it works, and that's what I want, then I'm gonna implement it.
Yeah, but that exception or that function will never throw an
Okay.
exception.
This I guess that this was.
It looks like some old code.
And
then-
copied and pasted
Yeah.
old code.
Yeah.
There's a red line.
This was the first function that we did now, and
There's a
there.
red line up there.
And this will break something else because you catch that exception somewhere else. So.
Possibly.
Yeah,
It might not. It looks like it has, but
yeah, because
Because it doesn't throw the catch. No, it does. If you put the throws, you have to put a catch here.
Yeah.
I know it. But if you just put the catch inside the function, you don't need to put outside the function. So,
Yep.
well, I'll just fix it afterwards.
Yep. It's just
It's fine.
So
I know the
I understand. Where are you handling the exception, and whether it gets pushed up or handled locally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe more comments could be appreciated.
Yeah. I know that.
A few more explanations as to why things are happening. Comments in the code. Yep.
And maybe remove all the strings and numbers to constants at the top.
Yeah, I know. I think I'd probably use Martin's suggestion of using the resources string, the string resources, and put them into like host into the strings resources. They also make it clean to go and change host, because then you change it in one place rather than here.
Yeah, also Mario suggested it because, like he said, okay, you can write a script in MySQL to fill up your database just for test purposes. Like, I mean, right now the data is included manually. I just have to, okay, yeah, we made this function, then we fill this table and all that, but we can make a second server, like another URL, just to fill it with some purposes to change that specific variable to fill it the data, and we just change the URL.
Yeah.
So that would be pretty handy.
Yeah, yeah. So now I put that in API strings.
Oh yeah, and remove the Spanish text, please. The Spanish text. It's the last line in the log.
Yeah, you did.
Well,
yeah, you did have
this
some.
is a log. This one will be deleted.
Still Spanish.
Still Spanish.
It's still Spanish. So, so it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that discussion. So I know that what's his name? One of our German lecturers. When he arrived, he was surprised that we allowed students to write comments in Norwegian, because at his university in Germany, all code had to be written in English. Right? All variable names had to be in English, all comments had to be in English, because they said it's code, code is written in English, code is not written in any other language, right? So that was his university's policy. Now, that's not true of all universities, certainly, right? So here in Norway, there are people who use Norwegian. The real challenge of using Norwegian is, what do you do about all your ers and all the other characters? Like, each individual is like an O, a double A, or do you just use A and use OE, or just O for because you know what exactly should be the ASCII version of those. And if you get a compiler that doesn't like your Unicode and it goes and spits on your comments and spits on your variables, and it's just so yeah, there is it is an open discussion as whether you should code in English or a local language, and I assume most Spanish universities probably will code in Spanish because their English isn't as good, right? So the Germans tend to have better English. So the German and the Dutch are probably quite good in English, and so they can get by with coding in English and using English variable names. But the Spanish, I would think you'd find a lot more actual Spanish variable names and Spanish comments because most people won't read them, right? It does limit your ability to do international work and outsourcing work, because outsourcing is going to be in English. Right? So yeah, you guys are lucky as Norwegians that you learn enough English that you can probably program in English. It also can help when you ask on Stack Overflow to post your code in English. You get far fewer responses if you push in Norwegian code onto Stack Overflow. Yeah, so no, it is you know, you're right. Taking out the Spanish would be, yeah.
I mean, I think there are a few of Spanish. Mostly I read everything in English, but when I'm tired, I don't know.
Yeah,
it was like the beginning.
Yeah, no. Our Norwegian students will sometimes switch between Norwegian and English and forget which language they're speaking because they speak both so commonly. And so sometimes they'll be speaking in Norwegian, they'll hit some code or something we've talked about in class, you start using some English terms, and then switch the conversation in English and just keep talking in English because they're now speaking English because that's the concepts they have. And then they'll hit another term that's in Norwegian and they'll switch back into Norwegian and they'll just continue in Norwegian. I've overheard this happen without them noticing, it would seem, that they've been switching languages back and forth. So, you know, well, I've seen, I don't know if any of them, I've seen you guys do this, but I have seen students do this. Have you noticed yourself do this?
Yeah.
I've actively tried to get my students to stick to Norwegian when they're talking to me, because, at least the Norwegian ones, because there is a 90% chance that they will be able to explain their ideas, which using their Norwegian vocabulary better to me than if they do it in English, because we both speak Norwegian better than we speak English.
Right.
But I have noticed some of them that would preferably stick to English for some weird reason, even though they're talking to Norwegians.
Well, so there's certainly so one justification for talking code in English is because a lot of like what you're reading online, and a lot of what you're coding, and a lot of like the words you're used to using to think about are actually the English version rather than the Norwegian version. So you're not actually translating those terms into Norwegian when you read them. You're reading them as the English term and thinking about them in English. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes when I get my leave myself online, maybe I watch a video, and I take references from that, I learn, and I think about it, and the whole that process is in English.
Yeah.
Because the guy that I saw, or anything that I read online, was in English, so if I start thinking about it in Norwegian, then suddenly I realize, wait, I don't know that word, how should I explain that?
Yeah.
It can actually be more problematic to explain it in Norwegian than English, because you have already thought about it in only English terms.
Yeah, so it's because if you're watching a YouTube video, which often is where you learn a bunch of the stuff.
I know if you read to get more, just read to understand more, you will most likely read it in English.
Yep, yep. And for some of you, the concept won't have been introduced in Norwegian at any point.
Yeah.
And so the concept comes into your brain as an English language concept.
Yeah.
And so it's attached to those English words, and so you just use English to describe it because that's its native tongue. So yeah. I'm leaving, so you guys can go back speaking Norwegian all the time that you like anyway. So I certainly know when I arrived here in Gjøvik, I'm Tarja, who became head of the IMT group for a while. He was apologetic about his English because it was so bad, and he said it was so bad. It wasn't particularly bad, but he just never practiced, and so he never spoke English really because he taught in Norwegian. And he had meetings in Norwegian, and his kids spoke Norwegian, and he watched Norwegian TV, so when would he speak English? And so he didn't. Then I arrived and started speaking English to him all the time, and Marius arrived and started going climbing and speaking English to him all the time, and now his English is fine. So he's got better at English because he's kind of been forced to think in English about the computer science stuff. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, right? I think there is some advantage to being able to do things in English, and certainly internationalization advantage, that we can bring in Spanish students and the Norwegians can speak in English to you guys, right? That helps. So there is some advantages there. I know some people talk about the cultural differences in languages, right? And so some concepts are different in German particularly, when thinking logically in structure. Some of the way German appends words to create longer words, and Norwegian does this as well, right? You create long words from just appending words into a single word, right? And that's quite nice in variable names, because in English, we tend not to do that. So when we create long variable names, which are words mashed together, it looks wrong to us, right? Because you don't mash English words together like that. But apparently the Germans and the Norwegians, that's fine, right? That's just, you know, it's a word. You know, it's 50 characters long. It's a word, that's fine. So like, sometimes I think there are some Norwegian concepts that do work better with code than English concepts. But again, it's like, will people who are reading your code be able to understand it, right? And I think that like some of the problem that we have with your code, Glenn, is that there's a lot in your head that wasn't in the code, right? Now, it's in both of your heads, so that's fine. While it's just you two reading the code, you both have the same mental model in your head, so everything's in sync. It's just when I read the code, I don't have that access to that mental model, and so everything's like, what the, and where, and how did you, and what the? And it's more because you haven't expressed your mental model into the code.
Yeah, we just go over and comment. So,
well, so it's a combination. Sometimes it's comments, other times it is putting the mental structure that's happening in your brain actually into the code itself, right? Rather than having half the program happening in your head and half the program happening in the code, right? So that ability to get out what's in your head and kind of export it into code, and not rely on tacit knowledge that you have in your head to understand what's going on in the code, right? And language is part of that, right? So being able to express yourself in code is part of that. Okay, any other questions? I think we're 4 o'clock, so I better get home. I'm not here next week. I'm trying to sign up Richard Barlow to be a 20th position so he can come in. But otherwise, I won't be here next week because I'll still be in Florence at a Horizon 2020 meeting with lawyers, because lawyers talk for ages. God, they talk. But yeah, so I'll see you in 2 weeks' time then. Okay. But if you have any queries, oh, and if you're using the LaTeX thing, one of you, Martin, you noticed that I accidentally. This is entirely my own fault. I'm sorry. I was doing some testing. I left in a testing phrase called first, which printed first. Completely unnecessary. Just commented out. Sorry. It was a test. It was wrong. Hands up. I'm sorry. I commented a test. I should not have committed a test. I should have got rid of that shit before I committed it. So. Hey, coming down the line, it's fine. Actually, what I did is I actually fixed up the CLS file, because what I was doing was, because I had a request on, we want to book out a number. But I wanted to test out whether if statements and what else were working. So I used first as my and insert only if it's defined. So I was halfway through that when I got interrupted. I don't know why. I committed broken code. Well, no, I didn't commit broken code because I checked that it compiles, but I didn't check that it did everything.
Not even one, but then it was kind of